let everyone know they're being recorded.
Oh, great. Let's get into finally the moment we've all been waiting for. Uh
So yeah, it took us about an hour and a half to get through the plots of the books. Uh, it's difficult to do. I think part of the reason I at least wanted to talk about Harry Potter is it's a good stepping stone to both talk about fantasy adventures, the difference between books and their adaptations as films or TV shows. This one, I guess both of us have some sort of particular nostalgia for. I think in recent years it's fallen out of favor as a franchise, both because of the failure of the new movies, like the Fantastic Beast movies, in addition to the fact that J.K. Rowling, the author of the books, has decided to make one particular social issue something that it's just a hill she wants to die on, about trans people for seemingly no reason. It's really unclear why that's a hill she needs to die. Whatever. We don't need to get into turfs and things. And I'm not going to defend J.K. Rowling because, by and large, she seems like a deeply unpleasant person in real life. And certainly after the release of the last Harry Potter book, um, her status as a near billionaire has probably just made her into an intolerable individual. So, yeah, I'm not sure where you want to start talking about these books, talking about the.
I did want to also mention, which we will like ease into explaining to our audience, that we're gonna, with this new format, change things so that that first part is going to be us like really just giving the broad strokes. So like if you really want like a definitive explanation of it, of like a movie or a book or something, like obviously like you should just read it for yourself. But like it's not meant to fill in all of the different crevices and cracks, like that first part. So if you get frustrated with how quickly we're moving or we gloss over your favorite character, sorry, but yeah, that's not what we're doing.
No,
Not
the
sorry
no,
about it.
we're trying to get a difference between summary episodes for people who vaguely want to hear us analyze a piece of media without having read or watched it. But yeah,
I
in this case I would definitely recommend,
I
even in 2024, reading the Harry Potter books.
Yeah, if you haven't read them, one, just because the experience itself is enjoyable, I would say for the most part. Like if you like stories, I mean, if you don't like stories, then I wouldn't read them. But
Well,
anyway,
specifically book 2 through 6 are just reasonably good mysteries where the solution to the mystery is pretty interesting.
yeah, and also they are just very popular pieces of media. So like that in and of itself, like you'll have just more clarity, I guess, around, I don't know, references, which is not necessarily a reason to read a story, but whatever. It's an
This
aside to it.
this
Um,
is the highest selling book series of all time. So,
yeah, yeah.
um,
So where I would start is just basically kind of where you were explaining, where this story is very much a Bildungsroman. It is the hero's journey, the coming of age as well aspects.
mhm.
It's both of those combined. And even even though it fails at times, which we kind of outlined in part one somewhat, the experience is really enjoyable, and I would say like whole books of it just are great. Like they're an enjoyable ride and experience. The characters are unique. Some of the concepts are really interesting, and as you kind of said, like we've used this term before, but the gestalt um, certainly rings true with some of these stories, as the story is better than the sum of its parts, and quite frankly, some of the parts are um, very enjoyable to just even think about and experience, which is why the books are within like theme parks. Certain areas of theme parks have been like recreated, right? So you have like Hogsmeade, you have like Butterbeer, which is within Hogsmeade. You have like all of these sort of like touchstones within the Harry Potter world in what is it, Warner Brothers Studio or like Universal Studios? I don't know. I've never been, but
Universal.
yeah. But it's like hinging upon that factor of like nostalgia and then bringing that into like a consumer perspective or capitalist perspective rather, and where obviously they're profiting off of it. Um, but at the same time, like there's a reason why they're able to do that is because so many people are hyped up on it. And the reason why they're so hyped up, sorry, that was a really long-winded way of getting to the fact that J.K. Rowling's imagery that she uses as well as world building um, is hinged upon these unique aspects that she infuses in her world that the characters interact with. And the way that they use whatever those magical items are or the magical places is just really enjoyable to sort of imagine yourself basking in, as well as like experiencing through the eyes of the characters. So like that to me is what's exciting about these stories is like reliving that magic. Um, of the different scenes and the magical items that they interact with along the way.
Yeah, and they operate like even as individual books, they operate really well as like a complete story circle where the cycle begins with world as normal, which is world as misery, and then world of wonder, world of excitement, world of adventure, world of tragedy, and then success returning to world of normalcy and sort of suffering. Because like Harry in the real world versus Harry at Hogwarts is basically like his real world is just him being abused by his aunt and uncle, and then his escape from them to get to the wizarding world, which is both interesting but dangerous, like more dangerous than his regular world. Um, is where those elements come in. I think the strongest part of these books, which I described before, is their sense of mystery because it gives Harry both a world to exist in and a world for you to enjoy because that's the whole point of fantasy is basically to escape into something that is completely fantastical. Um, but then at the same time, there has to be that adventure. So each of these books has a very clear call to action. Like book one is basically like, what is the secret being hidden in the castle? And the secret is there's a rock that makes you immortal. Book two, what is making students get petrified? And it's a big snake. Book three, why is this guy hellbent on killing Harry? And then it's like, well, he's not actually. It was a rat disguised as a man disguised as a rat who would faked his death to trick the guy to get the time travel to make sure that the griffin could fly him home. I know I'm making fun of the third book, but like all that convolution does work well at delivering like a pretty good ending. It's just trying to describe that is so much worse than just experiencing it,
Yes.
either by reading it or by watching the movie. Both, I think, are which really phenomenal.
Oh yeah.
Um,
The whole situation when they're at Hagrid's, I believe they go to Hagrid's to like just console him because Buckbeak was like killed. I'm pretty sure, and that is kind of the thing that like triggers everything. But from there to Ron being attacked and dragged under the Whomping Willow, um, which brings up another point that Rowling does a pretty good job of asserting certain magical elements around the castle and the grounds, which she builds upon in future books. Um, like the Whomping Willow, for instance, like the Forbidden Forest, like Hogsmeade, and she keeps like pushing things up from there. Obviously, in the later books, some of it falls apart because there's like a lot more Deus Ex Machina and a lot more characters who you like are vaguely aware of or just have never been mentioned at all. And you're like, all right, like maybe you could have woven this aspect in somewhere else. Like even just Harry walking through the library and like seeing a statue of, I don't know, Xenophilius, whatever the hell their name is or
Love
something.
good.
Yeah, right? Like but I don't know if that's I don't know if that comes down to her not having had it planned out from the beginning or just I don't know. I truly have no idea. Um but
It seems
anyway,
like the last two books were definitely written together. It seems like there's a big difference between the fourth and fifth book and the fourth book and the previous three.
yeah, for sure.
Um,
It's a good way of
both
separating them, yeah.
both in terms of style, prose, plotting, and then the overarching narrative. Because the first three are definitely like written at the same, like sort of consecutively, where she didn't necessarily have the full thing planned out, but she knew she wanted to keep them contained, which is why all three of them have the same formula of Harry starts in a shitty place, goes to school, goes through school things, winds up in the hospital, wins the World Cup or what the Wizarding special, I'm the bestest boy, and then goes back home. Uh, there was something you said in there that I wanted to respond to, but I've tricked myself. I think I think the fifth book, this is probably what I wanted to say, is the fifth book is where things sort of hinge, where you get the best elements of Rowling as a storyteller, both in terms of creating new interesting places in the fantasy world and the worst parts of her writing, which is falling back on things like Deus Ex Machinas, um, really bad MacGuffins and plot contrivances and like bigger things that are meant to symbolize some greater, deeper mystery that are actually really, really simple. Like the prophecy that Harry is the chosen one. Um, or just like arbitrarily killing a character because you need there to be some sort of deeper emotional stakes, despite the fact that they aren't really there. So Sirius's death feels impactful, but I think it would feel more impactful if Sirius was actually a part of the stories because Sirius is a very limited part of the stories, and it's really only his connection to his parents that makes his death feel like it matters in any sort of way.
Mm, I never thought of that, but I would agree with that, yeah.
I mean, these are meant for children, so ultimately a lot of the deaths are going to hit harder because death in general is going to hit harder than if you're like 60 years old and you've had, 500 people die. The death of Sirius Black isn't going to matter because you just didn't know who this guy was.
Right.
Um, but yeah, the specifically in that fifth book, I really like there's always this theme bubbling through the first four or so novels of like authoritarianism and how authority is bad. Like anything that tries to stop Harry as a subject of authority is wrong, which I really like that it's just chaotic. It's like break all the rules. It doesn't matter. Be a chaos child like Harry and Ron.
Yeah, I mean the books are pushing that narrative as well, like be a rebel. The rules don't apply to you, or if they do apply to you, they only part of them applies to you.
Hmm.
Basically, which is obviously dangerous or definitely can be dangerous, right? Depending on how you're using that. But yeah.
Well,
Um
I don't know if I want to get into a rant about the end of the books or not. I think it gets dangerous when it tries to describe what you're rallying against. Because
mm,
ultimately, like the themes of like freedom versus authority are interesting when it's about a kid trapped in a boarding school who has yearned for freedom his whole life because he's literally locked in a cupboard. So like him breaking free from that prison only to learn he's in another where it's like you have to go to classes and there's bars on the windows and you can't leave the school grounds to go to the bar with your friends. Like there's always these very formulaic stages that Harry has to break through to get some new level of freedom. But then the books go off the rails when he finally gets freedom. Like by the sixth and seventh books, like the seventh book, he's just free to do whatever he wants. And that's where there's no structure and the books become really dull because it's just Harry in a tent with his friends. And they're like, where do we get the MacGuffin?
Yeah, there's a lot. There's definitely way too much talking in in that book. I sent you it's just a storytelling techniques thing. You can click on it. why, why are you doing the old man thing where you glower and squint your eyes into the screen? You mentioned Deus Ex Machina, and so I wanted to bring this up just to see how many different ones are used, but you can look at it later. Anyway, yeah, there's too much dialogue in that fifth book. Um, is it the fifth or sorry, the seventh book? The seventh book where they're literally just in tents or like in the woods, just
It's
heckling each other and
the seventh book, yeah.
trying to figure out what it is that they're gonna do next.
Well, the
Like
problem is in trying to do something new, it highlights all of Rowling's flaws as a writer.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you there.
Two things. Uh the tension that she attempts to build in the seventh book, but from their dialogue and from them being lost in the woods and trying to figure out what's next, it is glaringly just her trying to figure out where the story should go and she doesn't know what to do. So she definitely should have had something else happen to sort of like push those events along. Whereas in the other stories, obviously she could rely on the magical castle or the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher or whatever element she had in the story that pushed it along. In the seventh book, that thing that pushed it along was obviously um the magic wand, and the story behind that. The second thing is, as we said before, the magic wand and the story behind that should have been woven in um, before that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, earlier on, no doubt. I think that's the biggest problem is the significance of all of the MacGuffins is irrelevant. Because, like, we definitely, I don't think we've necessarily described MacGuffins. Like, it's an object or a person or an event that is integral to the plot, but is insignificant by itself. Like, in a vacuum, it's meaningless. And so, like, the goblet of Hufflepuff is literally just a cup. But in the plot, it is a thing that contains Voldemort's soul because of a murder he committed. So even though they have to destroy it in order to kill Voldemort, like there's this larger point to it. Ultimately, it's just we need to break into a bank to destroy a cup because that's just going to be 100 pages now. We just got to break into a bank and blow up a cup. And that's this entire book. Like opening the book up with them being like, there's these things called the Deathly Hallows, and there's a really powerful gun, and there's a rock that lets you look at ghosts, and there's a blanket that makes you invisible.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. That this book is probably where me as a kid started. How do I put this? Started struggling with history because when things became too
Mm.
convoluted in history class and my teacher didn't bother explaining why these things mattered, my brain just turned off. They're just like, oh yeah, and also Woodrow Wilson was the president, and also this other thing was happening at the time, and I'm like, that's cool, but like, how do these things connect? Like, can you like obviously in a story you want to show them how these connect. You don't want to just be telling us how they connect. And the
Yeah.
story is literally just telling you how they connect. It's like, oh yeah, there's another book here. Read this book. And in reading it, you're just with Harry, either reading it or inside of the book, right? Because doesn't he like go in the past or he's in the book somehow? I forget um how that unfolds. He's in a memory or something. Which
A
is fine.
memory of what?
With the like Elder Wand and like the contrivances
No, they
within
literally
like
are just they just read a book.
okay, got it. Which
In the
like I
movie,
said,
it's like a whole animated sequence where they're like, it's the title of the movie, therefore it's important.
yeah. Um, but anyway, I don't remember where I was going with that.
My bad.
Um,
No,
what's
I know what you mean. Like, if you don't have the full context of
oh
why
yeah,
the
with
object is important.
exactly. So like as soon as you have like seven objects or seven characters, but you don't explain or show like how they're connected, like people are just like, that's fucking great. You have a magic rock. Good job. And here's a
Hmm.
big kite that flies in the sky, and now you got a magic helm. Like it's like introducing new characters in a show and then one of them dies and you're like, we don't care about Ed. In fact, now I'm rooting for Ed to get his head cut off. Like, please just get rid of this person. Like, we don't want this person in the show anymore. Like, I've tried explaining this before, but like I've just seen movies or shows like all the time where I'm like, you're trying to make it dramatic or tension filled, and no one gives a shit that this person just died, or like the drama is, it's just over the top. Um,
See the turtle of enormous girth. On his shell he holds the earth.
oh my God, what
His
is
thoughts
that?
are slow but always kind. He holds us all within his mind.
Is this from the the book?
No, this is it's it's a similar it's a Stephen King thing.
Okay.
So Stephen King, this is an aside that I swear to God makes sense. So for those who are fans of Stephen King, who is an all over the place author, Stephen King's books are all in the same universe. So he's written like, I don't know, 100 novels at this point. They're all connected, and there are some really interesting visual graphics and videos that show how they're all connected in a way that is legitimately interesting. But the actual minutia of how they're connected is like gobbledygook, like complete nonsense, just jabberwocky levels of no meaning. And part of it is that the entire world, like the universe that these books are built on, is on top of a gigantic, omnipotent, kind turtle. And they say that quote when they describe it. And so, like,
Jesus.
all of the elements that connect things, like there are a whole series, like the Dark Tower is like 7 books, and it has just as many nonsensical MacGuffins as the Harry Potter books do. And then it's just obscurely connected to like 3 other book series that are equally weird fantasy stuff. And then the whole time is just on the back it holds the earth. Like it's I don't know if that explanation necessarily makes sense, where it's like technically it's all related, but how it gets there is not clearly defined to be interesting. And so you
Yes.
hearing that all of Stephen King's books are like about a god turtle that connects the world, like it just doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And so if every book, here's a part that's specifically frustrating, is that the diary of Tom Riddle is a Horcrux, right?
Hmm.
So that could have meant that every book had a Horcrux. And the story accidentally was about Harry finding the Horcrux, which is both a source of evil power and something interesting that relates to a plot and has a sort of meta contextual form explanation to it. Because in a way, it's about how taking things literally at their word is wrong. Like there should be a deeper analysis. You don't need to listen to books, and it relates to Harry's struggle against authority. Like there's some
Right.
deeper, interesting stuff with the diary.
Or reading books, like only reading books is bad, not acting on the books is a problem, like something like that. You mean as well? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I get what you're saying.
Um, but yeah, it like there just needed to be something else, a through line, because when you have all of this stuff come in at the end in the 6th book, where it's like, okay, the next book's a fetch quest of a bunch of objects, it just you lose everything. The scale gets out of proportion. Like you have to scale up your world more logically for things to make sense. You can't just have the end be a big battle with all the characters and have that be sad. I'm sure there are plenty of people who love the books. I mean, like the last book even. Uh, I'm just not one of them. Think about it like
The last book would be fine if it was like a summary or like a guidebook to the stories itself. But I definitely wish there was a better sort of way of cinching up the stories.
well, I haven't even talked about yet why I think this is just a complaint about structure and
Mm,
some of Rowling's flaws, because there are other elements to that last book that just fail. Like Rowling is really bad at inner character personal conflict when it's not structured around an existing formula. And so, like, there are arguments between Harry and Ron in books 4, 5, and 6 that are all supported by their competition for either women or
yes.
good grades or another thing that relates to them being in like a prep school that
Or their
aren't there.
or just them being their like male egos or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But in book 7, it's just their male egos and the fact that the
Yes.
locket makes them jealous because they both want to fuck Hermione or something.
Yeah.
And it's like, could you
Like,
be less of a hack, Rowling? Could you get some original material in here?
yeah, her deciding that that's what she was gonna like have the linchpin be, like that's the best that she came up with, really, really hurt. Um, yeah.
But there's other stuff that's really bad in the 7th book, like the fact that it recontextualizes Dumbledore. So Dumbledore,
Oh
let's
yeah, we should probably talk a little bit more about
let's get into
Dumbly.
Dumbledore. Because yeah, in my summary, I was highly critical of him. Um, so the fact that they have all of the elements of the first like 5 books where it ends with Dumbledore giving Harry Potter like nuggets of information that hint to some larger important thing, which turns out to just not exist. Um, Dumbledore's an idiot. So Dumbledore knows roughly all along about the Horcruxes, and he just wastes time. Like he knows Voldemort's gonna come back, doesn't do anything to stop him. Like invites Quirrell to the school and knows Voldemort is on Quirrell, doesn't try to stop him because he's like, "Duh, what
Yeah,
about the Horcruxes?" Like
he literally does know that.
he also deliberately tortures Harry. Like everything is a basically just something that a scenario Dumbledore creates to level Harry up, rather than just taking Harry under his wing and being like, okay, listen, Harry, the world sucks and is scary. Like, you got to learn how to be a better fighter. And I guess vaguely the explanation is Harry needed to learn it all on his own so that he didn't become evil or like Voldemort. But it seems like the odds that he would be that way increase by Dumbledore
Increase
being
by
weird and
him.
unhelpful.
Yes.
But then
Yes.
that's just kind of the explanation of Deathly Hallows. It's like, well, Dumbledore was just a weird, flawed guy all along and just didn't know how to help Harry. And everyone being in awe of him is only due to his power and nothing else. And he was kind of corrupted by his own power and incompetence.
Yeah.
But then just having it be like Dumbledore was gay and he didn't stop Voldemort earlier because he felt a connection to him similar to his love of Gellert Grindelwald.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that's a vague explanation of analysis of Dumbledore as a
How
incompetent rube.
how is Dumbledore being gay revealed? That was through a tweet? That
It's
like
implied in the book. Like it's definitely implied in the 7th book that he had a relationship with Grindelwald, but it's not explicitly said. Rowling did, I believe, confirm it in a tweet saying like, no, 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 my books are very, very gay. A lot of people were saying they weren't gay, but they were very gay.
Trump is now Rowling.
They're the same person. You can't convince me otherwise.
Yeah.
Both tone deaf billionaires who make bad business decisions. Actually, I guess that's not true. Rowling makes a lot of really good business decisions. like writing those Fantastic Beast films and tanking them at the box office by saying trans people didn't exist.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I definitely don't want to get into those books or movies. But
they're
uh
increasingly bad movies that are irrelevant. Yeah, we don't need to.
so I think we should move into the sort of like adaptation conversation that we wanted to get to and sort of assert um just because we're going to be doing this quite frequently with adaptations. Um
Mhm.
you could, like, a listener could definitely look at it like compare contrast, but I want to get into other conversations than just compare contrast. Sort of like why even why even try to adapt um the story itself? Like, it is obviously the studio is going to do it for money, right? But
Was gonna say that's the only reason to ever do it is money, but
right, the studio is doing that, but like I mean Chris Columbus probably wanted to make money from it, but like his vision for adapting the books, like he clearly had a vision to recreate it in his own style, but also trying to remain true to the story itself and the characters. um where to begin with this? I guess from an adaptation standpoint, when they began production of these, obviously like the casting was very critical um in deciding who would be Harry. And as the books were released, then obviously he would need to like grow older with Harry for the movies to work. um I would say by and large they did a really excellent job of casting for most of the main characters. Um, Ron is fine, but I guess that's kind of also, I don't have anything against Rupert Grint, to be clear. Um,
he's for sure the worst actor of all of
yeah,
them, both as a
right.
child and as an adult.
Yeah, Harry's pretty tough sometimes as well. um, but that might be less from um Radcliffe's acting and more from just Harry as a character. Like, it being kind of difficult to embody what it is he's trying to do, because there are also times where it's confusing, like what Harry is even feeling or what he's supposed to be doing. um I think Hermione is probably like the best casting of the three, and I mean her character also is pretty interesting throughout. um yeah, I mean, thankfully she's not just like a typical woman trope, I guess, throughout. For most of it, she is not, I would say, which I think really helps the general plot and the stories around it. So from a casting perspective, and then obviously like as you go throughout the rest of the books, they kind of fold in like higher level actors and actresses as well, right? Like you have, well, David Thewlis isn't necessarily a high level like acclaimed actor, but he's solid.
He's definitely a high level acclaimed actor.
Oh, okay. I mean, I like him a lot. I didn't know whether he was or wasn't.
No,
Um,
he's super famous. Just maybe not amongst like the American public of people born after like the 90s.
McGonagall, the actress who plays McGonagall is heralded as like one of the best British or Irish actresses. I forget her name. I also forget
Maggie
the
Smith.
yeah, Maggie Smith. I knew her last name was like Williams or something generic like that. Um, she's fantastic. The first Dumbledore dies after the second movie, right?
Mm-hmm. Richard Harris.
Richard Harris dies, and then they have to get another guy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what's that guy's name? The guy who plays Sirius Black.
the most famous actor in all of these movies.
Do you not remember his name either? Gordon?
Gordon, Gary Oldman.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Gordon from those Batman pictures.
Yeah, Gary Oldman is also great. And anyway, like the casting is solid. I would
Yeah, I
say
mean the
this.
background for those movies was basically that Rowling sold the rights to the first four movies and demanded, like, the only thing in her contract was basically that the whole cast had to be British or Irish.
Yes.
They weren't allowed to cast Americans because even though it was going to be like a pseudo American Warner Brothers production, she didn't want it to just be filled in by American actors doing bad British accents, which turned out was a really good call.
That was definitely a very good call. Yeah. Thank God they didn't do that. Um Malfoy is excellent as well. I think he's great in it. Moving on to something else aside from casting though. As you have mentioned before, or I guess I'm remembering the episode we recorded but did not release. Um there were several different directors, right? And Christopher Columbus, he directed the first two or three. The first two.
Hmm.
And then he basically stopped because he wanted to spend more time with his family. And
Hmm.
then that's when Karan took over for the third one, or who took
Hmm.
over? Okay, I forget who did the fourth though.
Mike Newell.
Right. So then they kept changing the director for the other ones, unless someone did two in a row. I don't remember.
Yes. Yeah, I mean the like essentially the story is Columbus gets hired to do the first two because of his success with Home Alone and Mrs. Doubtfire. So it's known that he can work well with kids, and it's known that he can create something that feels nostalgic on impact.
You mean Jingle All
So
the Way?
I don't, did he do Jingle All the Way?
He was a producer on it. I don't know if he directed it.
Oh, I was gonna say I didn't know he was involved with Jingle All the Way.
Can you still hear me?
I can, yeah, why?
Oh, I just got an alert about my audio changing somehow, so that's scary.
No, sounds the same to me.
All right.
Yeah, yeah. Chris Columbus is he's an interesting guy, but at any rate, yeah, he made the first two. Like you said, he left to be with his family. Alfonso Cuarón came to do the third one. Every single one of these movies had like a long list of people who wanted to make it or they tried to get to direct them. Um, I think the third movie had a lot of pre-production done by Guillermo del Toro, who then switched it over to Alfonso Cuarón because there wasn't enough creative freedom. And then Mike Newell was brought in to do the fourth one because he'd made fantasy movies in the past. And then all the rest after the fourth are done by David Yates.
Mm. Gotcha.
David Yates is a yes man, a talentless hack with no creative talent for directing films, who just makes sure the ship doesn't crash as it tries to go from one place to another, which makes those last few movies increasingly less interesting. Um, I
Yeah.
don't know if we need to get into that now, but um, in terms of like on the whole adaptations, I think the story of the changes in the creative team behind the camera show a lot of the reason why those movies are of a very different quality or nature. Because the first two have a very magical, sort of whimsical feel to them, because of Chris Columbus, and they help to develop the world. They help to show Hogwarts. They develop a lot of characters. They get through a lot of stuff, but they're slower. The pacing is much slower. They are definitively for children. Like they're a little bit tougher to rewatch because they're meant more for kids than for adults. Whereas that third one is made by, I think, a much more talented director in Alfonso Cuarón. but it's also made more for teenagers, sort of for adults. The story is a lot more complex. Kron does a really good job of balancing all of that. The CGI evolves in that one,
Hmm.
and they manage to still adhere mostly to the story without sacrificing a lot. Um, the only real difference in the first three movies to the first three books is basically just having fewer characters. The plots are pretty much all the same. There are a few scenes here or there that are cut out, but by and large, the story is exactly the same. The fourth one is where things start to change a lot, mainly because the fourth book is more than, I'm pretty sure, more than twice the length of the third. Um, yeah, it's like exactly twice as long.
Jeez.
So they have to cut a lot of that shit out to make it work. Mike Newell is another guy that's like, I mean, not an amazing director by any means. Yeah, when you mentioned that earlier, I was going to say that that is a great visual, both in the books and done well in the movies. Because I think part of the adaptation that goes well is Warner Brothers gets a lot of the like creature stuff right because it's not all just nonsensical CGI. And when it turns into that, it's when it goes downhill. There's a lot of practical effects that I think work well in the first few movies that starts to go away in the last few, especially the last two.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, your image on my screen was like completely glitched out. I was distracted. I just wanted to make sure everything was fine. That's why I was clicking around. Um,
Reached out.
we're good. Uh, Sirius is fine. He's still alive in my heart. Oh, terrifying.
This was what I wanted my background to be when we started to talk about the movies because this character back here, who we didn't mention at all in the summary of the books or yet at all, is a ghost of the castle named Peeves, who is very funny. Great character, not in the movies, which just makes the movies much worse, but has no relevance to the plot, so kind of hard to actually put him in.
Is Nicholas Flamel in the movies? I don't
He
really
is
remember.
he is in the first two, and then I don't think he's in any of the others, partially because John Cleese probably was too expensive or unavailable, and because he had Nicholas Flamel. Nicholas Flamel is in the first. He's not even in the first book. He's just mentioned off screen,
Hmm.
but he's not. He might be in the movie for a little bit. You mean Nearly Headless Nick?
Yeah, yeah, nearly
Yeah,
headless Nick.
that's who I thought of also. Nicholas
Gotcha.
Flamel is the guy who used to own the Immortality Rock
Yes.
and then
Yeah.
gives it up and dies prior to the first book.
God, the GIF
Nicholas,
here is like kind of making me seasick because the camera itself kind of moves a little bit with him also moving. Hopefully
that's
no
not
one's
good.
watching this while driving.
Well, don't do that anyway. Please don't watch
Yeah.
this while you're driving. Just listen to it to the
If
semi-soothing
there's
tones of voice.
if there's one thing that we are sponsored by, it is not crash test dummies.
No, it's
Uh
by, yeah, better not say it or we'll get demonetized because we make a lot of money off of this.
yes. We should mention our favorite and least favorite like aspects of the books. We kind of already jumped to the least favorite parts, mainly
I I didn't yet.
mainly the seventh book and its contrivances. Somewhat
Didn't.
somewhat rushed aspects as well as Rowling lost in the woods, lost in her own woods. Um I'll let you go first for your I'm sure you have a laundry list that you've been waiting to get out.
No, I don't have a laundry list. It's just my least favorite part of the books is the end of the whole series, like the end of the seventh book, and not the dumb epilogue either. That's fine. I just hate how they choose to defeat the villain. And I've tried explaining this before about how the philosophy of a work of art can really um, alter what the meaning comes out to be at the end, because ultimately the war being fought in the books between Harry and his friends and Voldemort is a battle between some kind of pseudo free society in the wizarding world and just a fascist authoritarianism that Voldemort wants,
Hmm.
kind of backed up by racial cleansing, because he wants to kill all of the non-wizards and all of the impure wizards. So that's not good. Nazis. Um,
Oh, Nazis
so
aren't good. Oh,
no, Nazis are very bad.
oh, I'm
We
glad
don't, we
you told
don't,
me that.
yeah, don't. Nazis are bad people. And
Forgot about that one.
yeah, they have too much hate in their heart. Not good. So anyway,
Yeah, we absolutely do not like Nazis here. To be clear.
yeah, this
Um,
podcast is firmly anti-Nazi. It's a
if we
tough line to draw in 2024, but
like
we drew it. We
a-
went there.
yeah, any jokes that I make involving Nazis is at their expense. It's it's nothing more than that. Any feigned ignorance around them as well. Um, no,
Yeah,
I
before I don't want to
go
get off
ahead, go
track
ahead.
here, but basically that's the crux of the philosophy that these books choose, is to be anti-Nazi in a way. Um, and so by defeating Voldemort, Voldemort's presence in the wizarding world has created a power vacuum because he destabilized the Ministry of Magic. He killed a bunch of very powerful wizards. He committed terrorist acts in the normal world. And the ending just kind of brushes over that. Like there's nothing about like rebuilding the world, because the epilogue goes on to say that one, Harry Potter just becomes a cop, which is highly suspicious. And and two, they just made the Ministry of Magic go back to what it was. Like Harry is just a cop, part of the same system, which allowed this festering of fascism to exist. Because the Ministry upholds all of the bad systems in the world, like the slavery of the elves, the fact that wizards can create sentient life out of nothing, which then just causes innumerable problems for everyone, like, magic cars that fly, that have minds of their own, giant monsters that do it. So nothing is solved by the end of the book. All they did was kill one guy, but that's sort of the background of the story, and something that Rowling is not a deep enough thinker and probably not a good enough writer to address, is the fact that this underlying current of fascism in her world will never be solved. At least not as long as the characters quote unquote live happily ever after. And so fundamentally that's the problem I have with the end of the whole series, is it just ends by brushing everything under the rug in a very childlike manner. And I understand it's written for children, but I think there is a better way to address fascism and the way that you root it out in a society and teach that to kids than to just say, then they beat Hitler and lived happily ever after. And by
Right.
not solving that problem, you basically just teach kids, once you, who are inherently good from birth, beat the bad man who's inherently bad from birth, well, then good guys win forever and ever, and the world just slips increasingly into gray morality, despite the fact that our content says that it's just good and bad, black and white. So that would be my least favorite part. So, rant over.
Yeah,
What's your
yeah, you're basically saying the MOWOW, the meaning of a work as a whole, gets a little bit misconstrued, if you will, or it could have had a better overarching finish, um, to it, or its point could have been better that it chose to make.
the Mohau? Yes, the Mohau and the plot and the philosophy are needlessly complicated and attempt to describe a sense of morality that it doesn't consistently back up, which becomes muddled because of the like basically complicated elements in the plot,
Yeah, and
which only uphold the existing world, which is flawed, but say that it's not flawed.
it's funny because some of the plot lines and stories are exceedingly complex, but then the ending is like so simple, and you're
That's
like,
what I mean. Yeah.
wait, what? Couldn't you have made the ending like a little bit more like nuanced, where like, okay, they get this thing, but then like this other thing, like they have to like sacrifice this other thing. They don't get everything, right? But instead they get all the characters basically get their cake and then they get to eat it as well.
Except the dead ones, but
Yeah, but even the dead
fuck
ones,
them, they're
it's
dead.
magic. It's magic. Like you can still contact the dead with in that
Right,
world.
right.
I think my least favorite part, I mean, aside from what you just talked about, because that's basically where I was going to go as well. I'm actually glad that you summarized that though, because yeah, that was the big horcrux of what I wanted to talk about of this story. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. I think my least favorite parts of this is actually like the love stuff that they try. Like I think you kind of like got to this point um earlier when you were talking about how Rowling definitely struggles in writing like interrelationships um and kind of like showing the emotions between characters. Like she just heavily relies on tropes of, oh well, you're a girl and I'm a guy, so let's try to get into a room together so we can talk alone and then maybe make out a little bit, which
Yeah, and
seems
that
like everything that she tries to put in there instead of like I'm not saying that they need to like have sex. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that like maybe they could like talk about something more, or like a character could just not be Ching Chong, like a cardboard cutout of an Asian character. Um maybe Harry and Ron need to not like sword fight each other with their dicks like constantly over Hermione, and then Harry ends up with Ginny, Ron's sister. Like
and
that
who has no personality in either the books or the movies. It's just no, he liked her all along from book two. That was definitely
Yeah, remember when he
we got there
saved her from
logically.
that huge snake? Now Harry gets to show her his snake. Harry, there you go. Like that's basically like how I read that the ending there, which there was hardly sorry, I couldn't help myself. There was like no like there was no connection between them throughout. It was just like, "Oh yeah, that's my sister." And Harry's like, "Yeah, she's pretty. I'd like her. Okay, I guess we should get together cuz you saved her before." Um
Yeah, I
it's like a
agree.
trifling thing to like it's a trifling thing to quibble over. Like I guess I'm in my mind having a pretend argument with J.K. Rowling now about her ability to write romance, but um, I don't know if it's an effort thing or if it's a skill issue, but there's
For
something
sure
there.
a skill issue.
There's something there with her uh the product, if you will, lacking as far as romance goes. But I would also argue by and large that's something that a lot of um, coming of age stories really struggle to show, is that romantic part, because I mean it's tough to do, and also it is um, just a common trope. Like it's very generic to have that in your story as well. So yeah, that's probably like one of my least favorite things, or at least something that could have been done better. And if like I would argue it would have been better if it hadn't really even been there at all. Um, at least not mentioned as much.
I think it's important to have it in something like a building Zermon, like the feelings of an adolescent coming to terms with not only sexual awakening, but feelings of romantic interest. Like you have to
No, I agree with you from a coming of age story. I just don't
coming of
really.
age.
I just think that these stories would have been enhanced had it like it if she's gonna either choose to do it this way, which is like how it was, or not have them in there, I would choose to not have it present. obviously the best option would be to have it and be done better to where he's actually like Harry, Ron, and Hermione, and all the characters are grappling with that coming of age aspect.
Well, so something that is definitely worth noting is that the first three books they were popular when they came out, but each one was still being like edited by someone else. And by the time the fourth book came out, the series was so popular that Rowling no longer needed to have someone come in and say, cut this, cut this, cut this, because it was
Right.
already proven that she could write. And so when that happens to artists and they stop having someone else edit their work
They
and they're
become
surrounded by
diluted.
yes men, yes, and they become they long-winded. And that's the
Yeah.
biggest flaw of those last few books, other than the seventh book, but they're just
Skill
really long.
issue.
They have
Yeah.
a yeah, there's a lot of extra stuff in there, and part of that is romantic entanglements and plot. Like the fourth book has the Yule Ball,
Yes.
which stuff like that makes sense to have in these stories, but do it in a way where it incorporates the world. Like, what is it about this that's magical? How is magic incorporated in this that's different than just it's a dance that teenagers go to and oh, Harry kind of wanted to go with Hermione or Harry wanted to go with Cho Chang, but Cho Chang went with Gabadoo and Hermione went with the Victor Crumb and Ron get to jealous with like you can have those interpersonal relationships work, but what makes it interesting in a book series like Harry Potter is how the fantasy world around it alters it.
Yeah.
And Rowling
Yeah.
just doesn't do that at all. And I think that's because Rowling had too much success early, and I think that's why the later books sort of fall apart. So, in
She may
terms of,
also struggle to either come up with mechanics or situations, or like what I'm saying is I'm not trying to psychoanalyze her here. I'm gonna try not to, but she may also struggle like romantically. Like she may struggle with understanding that, or maybe she forgot what it was like as a teenager. I have no idea.
she was divorced at some point. I imagine she remarried.
But anyway, like I think the point we're driving at is basically that if you are gonna set out to do a coming of age story, you need to figure out what perspective you're gonna have as far as like figuring out one's sexuality and like love and romance. Um, yeah. Anyway, favorite part of or favorite parts or aspects of this could be anything. It could be characters, it could be scenes, it could be um, objects or mechanics within the stories.
I mean, I think the world building is really super strong up through the first four books. Like, it takes stuff that is just common in mythology and blends it together in a way that feels original. Like I said before, like her mechanics of magic are not necessarily too well defined, and the power levels basically just become Dragon Ball Z after the fifth book. But um, I like the combination of stuff. I think the morality issues are never really explored, but like there's really funny things that make sense for a child to think about that is really, really obnoxious when you think about them as adults. So like um the Weasleys being obsessed with muggle objects is really funny as a kid and really dumb as an adult.
Hmm.
Um
Yeah. Okay. I see where you're driving at.
like you can't have Ron's dad be like, I want to build a radio because isn't that crazy that they have radios? You can't have him doing that in the same room where Ron's mom created sentient life, which is what happens. Like she just creates life in a, and it's like, nah, that's we can't. That doesn't make any sense. What are we doing here?
Right, like you can't have it both ways. You gotta choose one of them.
But you don't because when it's for kids. So like outside of that, like I just like some of the original creatures that she came up with are cool. Um like I would say Hagrid's plot lines. Like the stuff where Harry is just friends with Hagrid. That might be my favorite part of the first few books.
Yeah.
Because he
Uh,
just goes there and they hang out and they're just good friends.
I would I would definitely agree with that. Um,
Like Hagrid is kind of a simpleton and puts everyone in danger all the time, including Harry, because he just doesn't understand that like you shouldn't have giant poisonous spiders. But the
Hagrid.
part that
Hold on. Hagrid is Steve the crocodile hunter of the magic world.
yes, I would say my favorite scene in all of the books, like my favorite maybe chapter, is the chapter where Harry takes the wizard cocaine and goes like
Oh, I
instead of
forgot about that. Yeah.
like he needs to like go to Slughorn and accomplish something, and instead he's like, I'm just gonna go see Hagrid, and they're like, what the fuck? What's wrong with you? And he's just gotta see Hagrid, guy. And then they just have the funeral for the spider, which results in Hagrid and Slughorn getting drunk, and then Harry like maliciously guilt trips Slughorn into giving him what he wants. Like it's an actually well written scene where Harry is kind of evil and it shows a darkness in Harry that they never really fully explore and they need him to be on wizard cocaine to do it. But
Yeah.
also just Hagrid's beautiful relationship with Aragog, the evil spider who only loved Hagrid.
Literally only loved Hagrid. Wanted to eat and murder everything else. Uh, yeah. I was gonna say Hagrid is definitely one of my favorite characters. Um, Sirius Black is probably my favorite character. Um, just from like a tragic sense, but also from like an ability to write a mystery around him for like an entire book, and then like build off of his character in the remaining books. Because there are a couple of father figures for Harry, right? Um, to take over from Harry not having his father anymore because he was killed, and Sirius kind of takes on the mantle of that. Dumbledore does as well, but Dumbledore is kind of like in the background, knowing everything, but then not revealing it, like you said. And Sirius Black is also kind of that way in some ways. Um,
Well, what's interesting is they're both very aloof. Like they're just enigmatic characters naturally. Part of that I think might just be Rowling's ability to write um compelling like adult male characters
mhm.
and have them be well defined other than just oh yeah they're elusive and there's something very forlorn about Sirius Black's character. Like he always feels like he wants to do more for Harry and wants to be better friends with him and know him better, but they can't. And I think that's what makes his death so tragic is that it feels like they were finally getting close to developing a real friendship or a father-son bond, and then he just gets kablamoed and
Yeah. Well, his death also is rather climactic and anticlimactic because he is like either pushed or like magic pushes him through that veil.
no,
And
he
so
gets
like
he gets kablamoed by the wand. The wand
and the
shoots the green bullets, and Bellatrix Lestrange green bullet shoots him.
so he doesn't go through the veil
He does.
after getting kablamoed.
Yeah.
Damn.
She Vada cadavers him, and then his body just falls through it, and it's just meant to be like an interesting visual.
Oh, I totally thought he was like also pushed through it. Like he wasn't killed first. He died because he was pushed through. Maybe that's what happens in the movie, and I'm misremembering the book.
Well, the
But
movies go off the rails because they
yeah,
just stop saying spell names. It's just people shooting. They literally are guns.
right. That's why you refer to them as guns.
Yes.
Um, there's that. So serious, but also Jesus, we didn't even talk about Gringotts.
I'm
Oh
pretty sure
boy.
we said Neville's name 3 times. We kind of touched on Snape at least. Like there's some elements here that are very we talked about Gringotts at least once.
Yeah, Gringotts is definitely not talking about the globalists or anyone like that.
Crooked
Um,
nosed goblins,
who control the banking system. Hmm.
tricky. I mean, uh,
J.K. Rowling
trans people.
definitely wasn't trying to do that there.
Yeah, I wonder what JK's thoughts have been on that war, that conflict in the Middle East.
Anyway, something that I was gonna say aside from Gringotts, is that I think the story does a good job of making you care for characters and also like providing not so much of a black and white perspective on some of the characters because some of the characters like Sirius, for instance, as well as like James Potter, are shown to like be bullies in the past, right? They like prey upon other kids and like make fun of other kids, and they also are sadistic at times, you could say.
Those are
So
the
like,
only flawed character, other than the mustache twirling villains, the only flawed characters who have a gray sense of morality is James, Sirius, Lupin, Dumbledore, and Snape.
yeah.
The five
So
most important pseudo father figures in Harry's life.
yes. So what I was gonna say is that that's what I find fascinating about those characters is showing that aspect to them. And obviously the nth meme there is that Harry is supposed to like learn not to do that from them, right? And to be
Well,
caring.
yeah, that's a good scene in the seventh book where Lupin is like, I want to abandon my wife and child to come adventure with you. And Harry has to be his father and be like, bro, you gotta be there for your kid. Like, I don't know what to tell you, but that's not right. You can't do that. And Remus is like, my bad.
Yeah. Um, but
So
also
that by
what
that point, Harry's already learned what to do and what not to do. Like, he's already become the hero that he needs to be.
but the thing that I was building up to is I don't really have the words to explain this, but like there's got to be a concept for this in a story where like a character is going through pain or there's a character who is like completely helpless at that time and is like because like one of the curses, I forget which one it is. I think it's the Cruciatus curse is the one that like inflicts like a lot of pain on you and you're like kind of writhing, right?
Hmm.
I think Rowling is really good at causing like immense pity from an audience's perspective on someone who is like struggling and like for just like whimpering in like a corner from pain from either someone who is directly trying to cause that pain like a Death Eater or from someone else. um I think those scenes stand out to me in like each of the books where someone is just dealing with immense pain and then obviously someone has to like either come and save them or something like
Mm.
that. So I think those are built in really well throughout the stories.
Yeah, like
um
Neville's parents are really
yes,
fascinating for that
yes,
because they've literally been just cruciatus cursed into like senility because they're not even dead, right? They're alive, but they're just like brainless husks
yeah,
who
I'm
live at
pretty,
St. Mungo's.
yes. So like I think that's something that's like really easy as a kid to kind of like gloss over if you get like, all caught up on the butter beer and wands and shit. Uh but like as an adult, like holy hell, that's pretty intense stuff going on there. Like this kid's parents are sent to an asylum because their brains were fried from someone essentially yeah, electroshocking their brains. Um
It is kind of dumb that they never figured out a way to reverse that, but they needed the tragedy so Neville could be a hero.
yeah, yeah. Um, so I guess that's what I'm trying to say is that I think that those are well built into the story where most of the time they don't feel contrived. Like she's just like, oh, we need some pity points here for this character. Like it actually feels like that's what would happen in the story.
Mhm.
Whereas I've read other stories and just been like, wait, what? Why are they hurting this guy here? Or something like, okay, we know this guy is the bad person, but like, they don't really have cause to harm said person here.
I think
Um,
what you're describing is pretty much the Dobby is the embodiment of that, which
yes.
shows the full range of Rowland's ability to write that character. Because
Hmm.
when you meet Dobby, he's pitiful, but he's also immensely powerful, and he serves someone else. So you both feel bad for him and hate him because he's like a little gremlin who's like torturing Harry. And as the book progresses and you learn more about him, you just feel worse and worse for him because he's like internalized the sense of slavery and lack of control in his life so much
Hmm.
that he just self harms, which, as you
Yeah.
said, is just super dark. It's like, holy sh. Because going back and like reading that stuff where it's like Dobby just starts smashing his head again, just it's like, Jesus Christ. But then it's, all kind of ruined where they sacrifice Dobby just for a cheap boy at the midpoint of the seventh book
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's and that's another issue with the seventh, just killing characters for the sake of like, well, we need to raise the stakes more because these gobbledygook MacGuffins aren't doing the trick. Anyway,
Yeah,
I don't want
that's
to
that
get
is
fun.
something that a lot of stories suffer in the last um book or last chapter. But the other thing that I was gonna say is that some of the concepts I'm gonna try to not forget some of them, but one of the big ones that I actually am kind of incorporating into my story that I'm writing is the pensive. I have a different mechanic to access memories in the story I'm writing, but I really, really like the scenes with the pensive. Well, one, like the name, which gets to like linguistically, the terms that Rowling uses in the stories really help to enhance the magical effect of them because the term sounds like what that term would actually be if it was a thing in our world, right? So like it doesn't take much for your mind to jump to that and just accept it, whatever it is. And obviously like pensive, like you're sitting and thinking, right? You're thinking about something that happened in the past. Like that's easy to talk about, but like a squib, right? Like that's an easy term that you can just accept readily as someone who is incapable of magical powers despite being a wizard or a witch. But the pensive is really cool, right? It's a bowl that you can like dump your memories, like using your wand into, and then like you go into the bowl itself, into those memories. Um, yeah, I just really like that concept a lot. Um, I mean, obviously, like there are other things that she coined, like apparating, disapparating, uh, stuff like that is pretty interesting. Diagon Alley and Hogsmeade are both fascinating places onto themselves. Um, Especially as a kid when you're reading through them, right? Experiencing those places, like the world building aspect of them is so strong, so choice.
What's the evil part of Diagon Alley called?
Can't remember. Are you trying to find that?
No, I just forget what it's called.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
I
Nocturne
yeah,
Alley.
right, right. Darkness, light good, darkness bad.
Why does that exist?
I don't ask why.
On Nocturne Alley, I think that's a good stopping point. Unless you have anything more to add. I mean,
You didn't
you
talk.
briefly mentioned about the meaning of the work as a whole or what you wish it was, but
I didn't really say what I wished it was. I was just saying the way in which it fails to have like a cohesive one that's anything different than Star Wars, which is that some people are predetermined to be bad and some people are predetermined to be good.
well, that's the meaning of the work as a whole. That's this meaning of the work. Yeah.
Yeah. Star Wars is more interesting because at least there's one morally gray character who goes back and forth, where Snape is just good the whole time and they trick you into thinking he was bad.
Yeah.
Um,
Which I do
I guess he was bad
appreciate.
in the past,
Like,
but
I appreciate that they trick you because he and Sirius are kind of like similar in that way where there is mystery around them where you're like, is he bad? Is he good? Oh wait, Sirius is good. But Snape is like kind of good. Wait, he's bad. Oh wait, he actually just is one of the best characters throughout the story, right? That's what you learn at the end of the story. Um for what he was attempting to accomplish. Um yeah, I mean I think that these stories are, as we said, greater than the sum of their parts, despite the seventh book kind of falling off in a lot of ways.
your your video here has just become you like bouncing back and forth. I don't know what happened, but it's very, very funny.
If you click the 2 page thing at the top and then like minimize somewhat and then maximize, it should fix itself. That's how I fixed
Ah,
it.
there we go. Okay, yeah, it was very funny. Yeah, the only other things I really have to say are about sort of the adaptation and the ways in which elements of the adaptation work and which don't. And they speak more broadly to changes in filmmaking, which I think came apart because of the Harry Potter series, um, like the Harry Potter movie series. The shift in like filmmaking from practical effects to purely digital effects,
Mm,
the franchising of everything,
yeah.
blockbusterification of stories that otherwise didn't need to be, splitting up final chapters from one story into two.
Jesus Christ. Yeah.
These are all things that started with the
Yeah.
Harry Potter movies.
And Twilight. Yeah. Soon after.
Started with the Twilight just copied Harry Potter because Harry Potter worked.
Yep.
Um, but because there are more interesting adaptations, and I think this is just a very good fantasy series to get started on to dive into those later. We didn't necessarily talk so much about like the cliches that this story has per se, um, but I think they're common enough that pretty much anybody listening to this would already know what they are. Like Christian allegories and fairy tales and stories about stuff like prep schools and things. People are very familiar with that type of thing, like where the characters do poorly in school or what happens in a fairy tale with elements that are really dark and possibly tragic, but end up being good in the end.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, in any hero's journey, you can lean as much as you want into being Jesus Christ
Right.
embodied, and she does that very much so up until he meets God, aka Gandalf, I mean aka Dumbledore, who offers him a choice to go to heaven or go back. Yeah. Yep. So yeah, that's the Christian aspect, partially, you could say. But yeah, I mean, Harry Potter, as you said, is a solid starting place. It's a solid blueprint. If you're a decent writer or even a great writer, I don't know if I would say that she's a great writer. She's a great world building writer, I would say. She's very good at that. I would say she's a great world building writer. Um, but I wouldn't call her a great writer. Obviously, as far as success goes, you could call
She's the
her
best
a
writer
great
ever.
writer. Yeah, right.
That yeah, that's
From a
by
money making perspective.
yeah, success wise, there is no writer better, but she's better
Right.
than the people who wrote the Bible. Like
Yes. Depending on your definition of that, but as far as storytelling goes, I think she's a good writer. I would not say great. Um, But yeah, the point I was making is these stories are a solid blueprint if you are a good writer or a great writer. If you write a coming of age series, basically, they're super popular right now. So yeah, go for it. Any final witchy, wizardy thoughts here?
I mean, I really want to talk about Game of Thrones,
Ooh,
and I view
yeah.
this as a good stepping stone for that, mainly because
Shit.
the
And then Lord of the Rings.
well, Lord of the Rings you could talk about, yeah, much more
Oh.
easy, and because you could view Game of Thrones as almost like a direct response to Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, let us know in the comments. Let us know what other series you would like us to get to.
How do we even comment on this?
YouTube, podcasts,
How do you
wherever.
comment on a podcast?
Email us. I don't know. We
Where's
can
our
make the
where's
spot.
our email?
You can make the Spotify. You can make the Spotify interactive. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sticking around this far. Time to go. I know we're not doing Fantastic Beasts. Adios.